Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to episode 77 of the Cloudcast. We're coming to you live from South by Southwest down here in Austin, Texas, and we're really excited about the show tonight. There's a lot going on. Aaron, how are you tonight, man?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good. How are you enjoying South by Southwest?
Oh, it's one of those. It's just great to be seen and see everybody, and it's a great time.
It is awesome. You've been tweeting and using the right hashtags and all that stuff?
Of course.
Good. Excellent. So there's so many things going on down here that we thought instead of having guests, we would just kind of plow through a bunch of news and notes and what's going on in the industry and stuff like that. So, hey, one thing real quick though, man, and I feel bad telling you about this now, but I kind of had to go behind your back yesterday.
Well, I saw on Twitter you cheated, right?
Yeah, I sort of cheated on you. Well, I mean, it was kind of a weird thing because, for years we've been bad-mouthing Greg Neerman and his podcasts. And no, Greg's a good friend of the show. He called me up yesterday in what typically happens to us on the podcast. Their guest, who probably was much more famous and important than me, canceled or something like that. And he called me up and said, "Can you do it? We've got to get our show out before it goes in the register." And I was happy to oblige him. So I apologize for cheating on you and going on other podcasts.
Yep, absolutely.
So, anywho, so yeah, if anybody hears me talking on some other podcast, don't get confused. We're still doing this one.
Yeah. Are you still doing the Data Center Insiders too? Oh no, wait, no.
No, I had to leave that job. No, I'm all over the place, man. I'm all over the place. All right. So, and by the way, we're not at South by Southwest either.
Yeah, so before people are like, wait a second, what?
I haven't seen you guys. I thought you were, yeah. So, yeah, no, we're in Raleigh as normal, although we've been traveling a bunch lately. Where have you been lately, man?
Oh, where haven't I been, unfortunately? Probably the biggest highlight here recently was actually ApacheCon.
Okay.
Was it last week? Gosh, the weeks are all 2 weeks ago.
How's your neckbeard coming along?
Yeah, exactly. It was an interesting conference, to say the least. It was a lot of fun, actually. It was really good for me to really see kind of a different side, and certainly a different way to get things done. And it's amazing what they're able to do with, and they're very proud of the fact of, it's all individual contributors, right? There's no companies, there's no sponsorships, it's all about the individuals. And it really was a really cool conference.
Yeah. So what's the gist for anybody who doesn't know what ApacheCon is? What is it?
Yeah, so it is basically all of the products in the Apache Foundation, and they have tracks. So there was a cloud track, there was a Hadoop track, there was a web apps track, and basically back-to-back sessions and a lot of roundtables and panels and a lot of speaking in the expo hall and just all about all of the various Apache products, how to operate them better, maybe some up-and-coming trends or something new that a user is doing on them. Is a really interesting conference.
Cool. Any new projects that are like in incubation that people should keep their eye out for?
Probably nothing worth mentioning just yet. There were some names thrown around here and there, but nothing that I probably would highlight at this time.
Okay. And then where are you going to be in the next couple of weeks and months and stuff?
Yeah, so so Varo Madness is coming up. For those not familiar with Varo is a very large and prestigious reseller here in the North Carolina area, and they actually hold a customer event where, gosh, what was it? Maybe 700 people.
Yeah, it's a pretty big event. Yeah, it's always fun, and it's always right around March Madness time frame. Exactly,
and they're actually they kind of spread it out all over the state of North Carolina. So this year's actually up here in Durham, North Carolina, and it's coming up. So I'm heading to that. I believe you're heading to that as well, right?
Yep, I'll be at that one as well. And then where else are you going?
So I'm doing OpenStack Summit. I'm going to be, we'll see if they throw tomatoes at me or not when I walk in the door, but. There's definitely still have an interest in that technology and going to be going up there and hopefully doing some blogging and some podcasts from there.
Cool.
And then actually just found out late last week I'm going to be doing a session at Interop coming up as well. Cool. Don't have that completely nailed down on exactly what or what's going on, but I will be doing a session at Interop.
So you're presenting. You're going to
Yes.
speak? Oh, cool.
Yes.
Very, very
So how about you, man? What you got going on?
So I've been traveling a ton, but most of the travel's been for VirtuStream. Although, yeah, so I think I've traveled about 5 or 6 weeks out of the year so far. I'll be at Vero Madness with you, which will be cool. The night before, I'm doing a keynote, sort of pseudo keynote for one of the area RTP technology groups. It's a group all focused on healthcare, so it'll be interesting to get their take on healthcare, which is super regulated, and cloud computing, which is sometimes deemed to be not super regulated. So that'll be kind of fun. And then I'm going up to Structure for the Structure Data Conference up in New York City. So I get to spend my birthday probably on an airplane coming back from New York City. But that'll be kind of cool. Go do the big data thing and kind of figure out what's going on with all the SQLs and NoSQLs and new SQLs and Hadoops and things along those sorts. So that's what I got planned so far, or at least for the next month or so.
Sure. Awesome. Very cool.
So, and I forgot. I went out to Partner Exchange as well, which was
how
kind
was
of
Partner
interesting.
Exchange?
It was good. I wrote a blog about it. I'll probably never get invited back to Partner Exchange after the blog I wrote. It was slightly I would say critical. Just pointed out a few interesting sub things that I saw going on at the show. It was I don't want to make it into a commercial, but it was the first time I've really seen VMware sort of be not terribly clear about what value they provided for customers, right? It always used to be deploy this stuff, you'll save money, and everybody kind of around it was like, wow, that's really cool and it's good. And this time it was, hey, we have a bunch of new suites, buy our software. And so there's a very, very different vibe. And then of course, obviously the media was all abuzz because Pat Gelsinger, basically called out AWS and basically called out all the resellers for not being able to sell against AWS. So
right.
It was sort of interesting. But anyway, so PEX was okay. It was good. It was a different, like I said, it was just a different vibe this year. It was it just didn't seem to have like as much passion as it usually did. It didn't seem to have the same set of people that you typically see there. But so we'll see what happens. Maybe they're storing it all up for big announcements at VMworld in the fall.
Cool.
So, well, listen. Like we said, there's a ton of stuff going on. Sometimes it's good for us to just kind of get together and kind of sync up on news and notes and announcements. And so no guests tonight. But you brought a whole list of stuff that you thought was sort of interesting over the last couple of weeks. I brought a list. You want to sort of plow through it and we'll talk about it and kind of go through them?
Absolutely. So what's the first one you got there, Brian?
So the first one I got is sort of a small thing, but a weird thing. So in Stratus, the guys that we've had on a couple of times, George Reese and James Urquhart and Seema and all those folks, they changed their name. And you would think if you're going to do a name change, one of a couple of things is going on, like maybe you're going to get bought, or maybe you're going from sort of a strange name like Enstratus to something that would be easier to recognize. They went from Enstratus to Enstratius and added an I in there somewhere randomly.
Well, and did you see Twitter tonight?
Yeah, George was all fired up. He made it out to be some sort of legal thing against Stratus Computing or Stratus Technologies, which I would have thought 3 or 4 years ago when they named the company, they would have done some basic Google searches and found names like that, but apparently not. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know if it was one of those that just maybe the Stratus Technologies, and I kind of went out to their website and checked them out, and they're kind of almost like a specialty, at least it used to be, a specialty server builder kind of thing for financial markets and things like that, and manufacturing, and they've been around for a long time, but it seems like maybe they're starting to get into cloud, like a lot of other resellers are in some way or shape or form, and maybe it's kind of like the Apple versus the Beatles at one point of, well, you can have that name as long as it's not in the same markets kind of thing, right? I don't know if all of a sudden they're trying to get in the same markets and they want Enstratus to get the hell out of the way, or I don't know what happened there, right? And George, I don't know that George would ever publicly say it, or knowing George, maybe he would, but that seems to be what's going on.
Huh. All right. Well, so for anybody that has heard of Enstratus on our show, they're no longer Enstratus. They're now in Stratius or something like that. So throw an I in there. Spell checker will probably find it for you if you do a Google search on it. What do you got, man? What's your first one?
Yeah. So one of the big things that was going on was around OpenStack here and IBM. And so if you've been listening to the podcast, you know I did almost 10 years at IBM, so I tend to follow IBM pretty closely. And they still have a very large presence here in Raleigh. And they made some big announcements this week around OpenStack that they're really kind of going all in. A lot of their cloud offerings will be OpenStack based before too much longer. And they've kind of always made some announcements and did some support before, but this was a pretty big announcement. And in my mind, you know, I take this one much more seriously. And I actually blogged about this a long time ago. In my mind, there was three big players, all for somewhat slightly unique reasons. That if they all got behind OpenStack, then you know if they did it right and really supported it correctly, that I think they could probably change the game. And IBM, of course, was one of them because they have such a history of taking other open source technologies and really embracing them and really knowing how to make money on them. So I thought it was a big deal. The other one being Red Hat for the exact same reason. And the last one being HP just solely because they're such a big enterprise reseller. But as I put on kind of a blog post recently, it just seems like HP's really kind of phoning it in, and they don't seem to be doing too much with the, you know, they say they are, but I don't see a lot going on. But to kind of circle back to the IBM, you know, I thought it was a big deal. I really did.
Yeah, no, I think I was talking to an analyst here recently, just sort of totally off the record, and they were saying, you know, how would anybody know if OpenStack's doing well? Because you know, unless some company were to somehow break out the metrics, right? It's an open source project, so you can look at those kind of metrics, or you know, I guess you could look at, you know, what Rackspace's numbers look like, but I'm not sure they're going to be massively affected one way or the other, at least near term. And I said, you know, for me, the three things are going to be like a little bit like you said. What happens with HP's cloud? Does it take off? I mean, they've got a massive installed base to sort of try and flip over there. That's sort of stalling. The second one was, you know, go follow the companies that have all the smart OpenStack developers, which is basically Piston and Nebula and Mirantis and maybe Morph Labs, and go see who buys those guys, because I have a feeling, you know, they'll probably end up getting bought up by somebody. And the third one was, you know, when the shoe drops with IBM, you know, that's going to be a big deal. And I mean, we've been hearing rumors for, I don't know, a couple of quarters now that the IBM guys were kind of lining up a lot of developers. They were starting to get heavily involved. They were talking about completely rewriting the Nova stack, you know, the kind of the core compute stack. And so maybe this is it. It'll be interesting to see, you know, if they put it back out in the community or whether they keep it for themselves, or, you know, what they do with it. Because the trick with IBM is they don't really care about the underlying technology anymore. They want to drive, you know, contractor-driven services and support-driven solutions. And
yeah, I think Jeremiah Dooley, of course, you know, mockingly put it on Twitter best when he said, "IBM embracing a services-driven technology, shocking."
Yeah,
and I completely agree. Right, for them, it's probably all about, here's a product that I can put into my global services portfolio and make a lot of money off of.
Right. Which, you know, if they go doing that, they will probably end up being the biggest OpenStack contributor there are, because, you know, we're seeing from a lot of the other vendors, they make a big push about being public, but then when you look at what they actually give back to the community, it's not always all their special sauce. It's, well, we hold a little bit back for ourselves, or we, you know. So that'll be very, very interesting to watch. So so big news about IBM. We'll have to watch over the next 3 to 6 months how stable their cloud offerings become, and because that's the other trick with IBM. Their cloud offerings have been many, but their reality of their cloud offerings have been sort of few. So
yep.
We'll see what happens.
The next one was kind of OpenStack related as well. I just thought this was impressive, and I actually went and I haven't read it in depth yet, but OpenStack released an operations guide.
Now who released that? I saw that, but I haven't read it yet.
It is the OpenStack Foundation itself has released the guide, but it looks like a bunch of people, either a bunch of Rackspace people or a bunch of people got together at Rackspace and wrote it in about a week. So 5 to 7 days. It's about a 200-page document. Like I said, I just glanced through it. It looks like, it's probably something a lot of people have been asking for a very long time. So pretty impressive. to be able to throw that kind of documentation together in a week and do a sprint like that. That was really cool, and a nice addition to their portfolio, certainly. But I just wanted to highlight that.
No, so it's a good thing. It was actually one of the things I called out in that 10 questions about OpenStack blog is like, where's the reference architecture? Where's the thing that sort of tells you what to do? Yeah, you're right. Rackspace has sort of been leading the charge as far as documenting stuff. They call them blueprints in their thing, but yeah. So it'll be interesting to see how much this gets adopted, how generic it is enough that it can pick up a Piston Cloud OpenStack thing, or a Nebula, or a Cisco, or whatever, or if it's how applicable it is for all the different flavors of OpenStack that are out there right now.
Yep, exactly.
So I had a couple of PaaS ones that were a little bit interesting. So we covered Apprenda's announcement, sort of announced that they have JP Morgan Chase as a customer, which is a pretty big deal. Chase is obviously global name, global Fortune 100, Fortune 50 customer. So good progress for Apprenda and for PaaS sort of acceptance. And then the other thing we saw is that the Pivotal initiative, the thing that EMC and VMware sort of jointly spun out and gave them Cloud Foundry and Greenplum and all those things, the Pivotal guys finally said, hey, we are now going to sell our own distribution of Cloud Foundry. So sort of an interesting brings up another interesting thing of what's going on around Cloud Foundry. Is it an independent thing where you've got all these different companies that are going to do their stuff? Do they trust Pivotal? Do they not trust Pivotal? So it seemed to create some buzz. James Waters obviously put his spin on it that it's all good and they love the community, but it'll be interesting to see how independent they keep it. Will it be VMware centric under the covers? Will it be anybody's cloud centric under the covers? But if nothing else, it does mean there's potentially a place people can go for Cloud Foundry private PaaS, or if they're a service provider that wants to put PaaS out there. I assume this means they're gonna have service and support around it.
Right, and are they doing it as a public cloud hosted model as well as selling the product for your on-premise?
They didn't go into those details. That was never clear to me.
It
was one of these sort of long-winded, we love the community, we're going to do all the right things by the community sort of stump speech. But it didn't have a lot in there other than just, oh, and by the way, you'll be able to buy it from us. Now, I have to assume, and this is just a guess, I don't have any inside information, but I have to assume that if VMware ever does come out with this public cloud that the rumors keep percolating up again and so forth, I got to imagine that's going to be one of their prime application spaces they're going to go after. I got to imagine big data and platform as a service will be two of their core things as opposed to just going after VMs, I would assume, but we'll see.
Yeah.
So another cool thing that happened, I'll take two in a row and then I'll let you go back.
No, go ahead.
So you and I have started going to the local RTP DevOps days, or Triangle DevOps, and a couple weeks ago, a guy named Michael Hahn, who had been at RPath, and then when RPath shut down, went over to Cisco. He's sort of a pretty well-known automation developer. He's created a couple of very cool tools, one called Cobbler, one called Ansible. I think I'm pronouncing it right. He just recently launched a company called AnibleWorks. Him and one of the guys who was previously at Eucalyptus. So AnibleWorks is kind of focused.
Is it Ansible or Ansible?
I'm sorry, Ansible. I should have. Okay. Yeah, so Ansible. So his tools are Cobbler and Ansible. So
okay.
Their company's AnsibleWorks. We'll try and get them on one of these days. But it looks like a couple of, looks like some of the old Eucalyptus guys, some RPath guys, obviously some other folks, but they're basically positioning Ansible as, a different way of sort of solving the chef and puppet type of problem, and apparently it's maybe a simpler type of language and framework to work in. So that'll be kind of an interesting one to watch, especially since the wars between chef and puppet are pretty hot and heavy and religious these days.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
So, but always good to see, new stuff starting up in RTP.
Yeah, exactly. So my next two are kind of related to each other as well. AWS, so Amazon Web Services is out there, and they launched a bunch of new tools again. I mean, they are just on fire here lately when it comes to announcing new features, not necessarily in their core products, but they're actually branching out into new areas now. So they've got OpsWorks, which is kind of an automation suite that is specifically tailored toward their ecosystem. And then they did a Trusted Advisor, it's called, and it's really kind of billing with a little bit of monitoring. Certainly starts to address something we had talked about before of probably one of the biggest fears that I've seen is actually not so much can you do this or can you not do that. It's actually the overage bills. It's like the old days of cell phones and minutes, right? You get 400 minutes and you go over and you get $1,000 phone bill or something like that, right? So they're hopefully going to correct some of that with this. But then my big thought around all of that is when they start really branching out above and beyond the core services, are they really starting to eat their own ecosystem? All of these smaller startup kind of companies that are really starting to build products around them, and we're filling holes and filling needs in the AWS portfolios. It makes you realize very quickly that, if you're a small startup company with not a lot of employees, Amazon is a big machine, and it wouldn't take much to just take a team, throw them at this project, and then release something, and then what happens to you, right?
Yeah, no, you and I talked about this when, I can't remember which one it was that came out, because they both came out like within about a week of each other, and we were like, who's having a bad day today? Is it, because we've had a bunch of these guys on the show, right? We've had Stratus and RightScale, who are going to kind of be in that ops workspace. We've had Cloudability's been on the show. There's a bunch of other folks that are, doing the billing stuff. We've had folks like Cloud Passage who are trying to do security for, as an add-on for things like AWS. I've seen a few of those guys, Nuvem and some others, put out their blog that comes out immediately afterwards that goes, hey, they're, the service from AWS is simple. It's not as good as ours, and so on and so forth. But it can't be a good day when you wake up and the thing that the core platform that you build against basically goes, your company is now one of our features.
Right. And it's free and built in.
Yeah. We've seen this forever, on the infrastructure side. It's the reason, people have so much trouble with VMware these days if you're a storage company or you're a network company or something, and they go, no, that's just a feature now. So yeah, it's got to be interesting in that space. I thought it was a little bit interesting. I saw this comment was sort of interesting. One of the guys from Stratus, and I can't remember which one it was. It was either
it's John, Instradius.
I'm sorry, from Instradius. It made an interesting comment. It was either Mortman or Bachgalupe, and they basically, it was one of these religious kind of Twitter threads, and they said, there really is only one cloud, and it's AWS. And I, in the back of my mind, I went, you might believe that, but you pitch your product as being multi-cloud. And if you really only believe it's AWS, and maybe that is where the bulk of your customers come from, you're in a lot of trouble. Right. So yeah, it's got to be interesting to kind of be an add-on to a platform and just hope that you're faster than the platform is. Because I got to imagine, man, security will be next, and they keep kind of tiptoeing around PaaS, and who knows? We'll see.
Yep, I agree. And that kind of goes back to, and actually the reason why it probably hits so easily is actually I was just listening to episode 76 while I was cleaning out the garage today, since I wasn't on it, and Sinclair's kind of comparison of Apprenda versus, say, Azure, right? And the fact that Azure is almost like the big old bus and very generalized, and they're smaller, more nimble. They can serve the customers better and maybe move a little faster. But what happens when the big bus can move as fast as you?
Yeah.
In my mind, there's always that. That's part of the smaller startup ecosystem.
Yep. Yeah. No. Exactly. Exactly. So yeah, it's and especially when everything is API driven. I think this is part of the reason why the OpenStack guys are always afraid of completely emulating the AWS API, because they're like, they could get pissed, or they could just decide they were going to make money off us. So,
well, and it's funny you mention that, because that's actually my next story, and it's semi-related to AWS. I'll tell you why here in a second. But Netflix is going to be closing up their API, kind of like what Twitter did not too long ago as well. Of they're going to stop issuing new developer tokens to get in. And, I was wondering almost like, is this a trend in the fact that, take Twitter, for example, because honestly, Netflix shutting down their API, I don't know that many, say, third-party Netflix API things that, at least that I use day to day. But the Twitter one, everyone I know tends to use a third-party Twitter client as opposed to the actual Twitter apps.
Except me.
Right. Yeah, you're one of the only ones, right?
I hate tech, yeah.
But it was, but at the same time, it was one of those, you open up the API, you get all these developers to build a lot of clients and do a lot of features that you may not be able to scale fast enough to meet demand. But then once you're at scale, all of a sudden you start shutting down the API. You start, closing the tap so that you can gain control again. It seems like this strategy to open it up, get a bunch of market share, then close it back up and bring it back in-house. And is that something AWS is going to do? This is where I was ultimately going with this. Is this a trend, and is this something AWS could ultimately do at any time?
Yeah. The weird thing is, though, and this is, I'll have to dig into the Netflix one a little bit more. I mean, usually, like with Twitter, for example, I mean, forever Twitter had no business model. I mean, absolutely nobody could figure it out. And then it was, well, they'll sell ads because that's the only business model that Silicon Valley knows how to deal with. So they'll sell ads because it's a free service. And it was sort of like, well, we can't quite figure that out, but maybe if we control the client that you use, we can better figure out ads. But if Netflix does it, I think Netflix knows what their business model is. I mean, I don't think their business model is, there's not enough devices out there. I think their business model is, the content costs a ton of money, and we got to figure out how do we address our content costs, and the technology is a minor piece of it, right? I mean, we're seeing them do things like House of Cards and some other shows on their own. So that's kind of weird, and I would think the same thing for Amazon. It's sort of like, yeah, I mean, they potentially could shut it down at some point if they add enough features on themselves and they don't need the Instrati and Right Scales and Cloud Passages and all those kind of guys. But they kind of have a business model, and I would think their business model would flourish with an open API. But who knows? I mean, Simon Wardley would tell us we're out of our mind to think that they would shut their API down because so many people use it. But
yeah,
who knows? Yeah, so interesting. I will have to maybe we can find some people at Netflix who can explain to us why they would shut that thing down. So now here's an interesting one. So Heroku, the guys who are they're in the PaaS space. They're kind of a specialized type of PaaS, and they're associated at least loosely with Salesforce. They've got a class action lawsuit coming out against them, and it's all about. And this is an interesting one because basically it came up because a developer or a user of their service figured out over a period of time that they had switched the way they do load balancing or something along those lines, and in essence had gone from this really, really robust load balancing thing which delivered great performance to basically a round-robin one which delivered kind of crappy performance, or like, I don't know, 1/5 the performance or something. And so in essence you were having to buy a ton more instances in order to get the performance. And
yes,
so now
they're accusing them of a bait and switch, basically.
Yeah. Basically, they switched I think it was how they did load balancing from something that was really robust and you didn't have to buy a lot of instances to something that was really basic and you had to buy a lot of instances. And so it's trying to play this lawyer game of like, exactly what does your SLA say and exactly how did you word how your service delivers stuff. So you made the comment like, does this mean that people actually expect the cloud to work?
Right. And not just that, but do they expect insight into the black box?
Yeah.
Because a lot of times most people just the infrastructure. The whole idea is it's supposed to be there. You're not supposed to think about it, and it's just going to work. Well, what if it works? But it just doesn't. It's not optimized.
Yeah.
Or what if it was optimized and now it's not optimized? And somebody makes a change and doesn't tell you. What if that black box changes, but it's not in a binary on-off? What if it changes in shades of gray of it just does, it works, but maybe not as well as it used to work?
Well, and this a little bit, if you stretch this out a little bit, it ties back into the thing we just talked about. So let's say, for example, I wanted to use something like NuVem or Boundary or something, one of these sort of API-driven monitoring tools. And I was looking at my thing, and I noticed this stuff. That service could just very quickly go, I'm turning off the API, and oh, by the way, I have this new monitoring service that you have to use, and you may lose visibility into what's going on. So that's, it is part of the black box. It is sort of funny how the Clouderati are always like, hey, it's designed to fail. You need to know your application really well. Until one guy digs into it a little bit more and goes, wait a second, we're getting screwed here. And then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, they're the bad guys and they're evil and they've done wrong. And so that'll be an interesting one to watch.
The application didn't fail, it just ran slow.
Yeah.
Which cost you more money because it ran slow.
Right.
And the other thing I guess too that I was wondering about this too is, in my mind, Heroku I still put in that startup kind of bucket.
Yeah.
And when I think startup, I think could go out of business at any moment, could be bought at any moment. I don't know that I necessarily think of it as enterprise grade. And what I mean by that is exactly that of the black box that's always up. It's highly optimized. You don't think about it. It just is there and running and reliable. But, apparently there's a number of people that thought Heroku was exactly that and had a very different expectation level of a startup organization than I may have had.
Right.
So,
I think we're at this stage now where, I guess we could sort of go like that's a consumer service and that's an enterprise service, but I think at the end of the day, it's like, do you have a service that people expect to be running all the time, or is it expects to run, when it runs? And we're getting into this more and more kind of global 24/7, 365 world. You might be doing nothing but gaming, which would probably never be considered enterprise, but man, there's gamers up 24 hours a day, so maybe it does have to be 99.999% reliable, even though that's not what it was intended. I don't know. It's we're getting into blurry lines there. So you had one more. What was the last one you had on the list?
Yeah, so the last one was actually, it was just kind of a little bit of a rebuttal, if you will. So Randy Bias put out a blog article not too long ago, basically somewhat slamming VMware in the kind of Amazon versus VMware battle, and was listing out a bunch of reasons why VMware is wrong in their approach to cloud, and here's all the reasons why, et cetera, et cetera. And it generated a lot of buzz, as Randy tends to do. Mm-hmm. And then Massimo, and for those of you that don't know, he actually is on the service provider side of the house for VMware for cloud computing. And very prominent blog, very well respected, but he tends to be, he takes the anti-viewpoint of a lot of the Clouderati but actually does it in a very well, doesn't stick them in the eye, isn't like trying to be mean about it. He backs a lot of his blog posts up with a lot of facts. And it's really interesting to see Randy and Massimo kind of go back and forth, but he released another article in response to Randy's. And of course, VMware never releases an official response to all of this. It's one of those, like, they're never going to say, oh yeah, we don't speculate on rumors and this and that and opinions. And but Massimo did, and he did a pretty good job on it. And probably one of the biggest things though that I thought about was he basically said in the customers he's seeing, and he's very much an enterprise guy, the OpenStacks of the world, or the ones that require that kind of true elastic cloud architecture, It isn't the majority of enterprises. It's actually a very small subset of enterprises, or a small subset of enterprise workloads. And then he goes on to, here's some, facts and figures. And the one that I always, thought was kind of funny was, this is maybe $1 billion business, right? Well, that's what IBM does on their, AS400 or mainframe lines these days, which, everyone has said has been dead and buried for, 10, 20 years now.
Right.
But it's, IBM's still making $1 billion a year off these things, right? So it's just a really interesting article. You probably have to go out and read the entire article, and we'll put it in the show notes to actually get all of his, points and counterpoints. But it was one of those, again, there's no true one opinion about what cloud computing is.
No, and, to a certain extent, I mean, we've always sort of joked around cloud is whatever the person talking to you about cloud makes money on. So, Randy obviously jumped on the bandwagon when Pat Gelsinger, kind of made these hints about VMware versus Amazon. And, Randy's always been, we've had Randy on the show, and we touched on it with him a little bit. I mean, the thing that's always made me scratch my head with Randy is Randy has always been absolutely the biggest supporter of Amazon AWS. And I mean, he'll be the first to tell you the way they do things is the only way to do things. They are the only cloud. They're the only guys that can operate at scale. They are years and years ahead of anybody else. And then Randy goes, but you should buy this cloud architecture from me. And you kind of go, that's an interesting way of presenting the world. So it's, I'm going to use marketing to basically bash what's out there, and then I'm going to tell you that even though there is no other alternative, you should buy this thing from me. So, when Randy kind of goes off on his rants, I think Massimo, even though obviously he's got a little bit of a VMware tilt to him, does bring a lot of reality, a lot of market-driven reality. He tends to sort of, like you said, he brings it back to, look, there aren't very many people that have those demands, and a lot of them are Silicon Valley centric or whatever they are. So yeah, it's you do have to sort of separate the wheat from the chaff sometimes when some of these guys get fired up. And the other thing that was interesting was watching when Pat made his comments, and then James Staten from Forrester jumped on, and Randy jumped on, and they all sort of said, and George Reese jumped on, they all said, well, if VMware is going to take their public cloud out there with vCloud, it's dead in the water. It's dead to start with. And not one of them went, well, wait a second. They hired a ton of guys from Terramark to go work on some project that nobody knows about. They just brought back in a bunch of the Cloud Foundry guys that didn't go over there, like Mark Likovsky. There's some other people that are working on stuff, and it's like, maybe they're not building it with vCloud, and maybe they're not that far behind. And, so it almost becomes this, it's easy to poke it at the thing that but, if you don't make any speculation about what their strategy is going to be, they may find themselves looking very foolish here in 3 or 4 months if VMware comes out with some big public cloud announcement and is legitimate and can scale and does have pricing that's interesting. So,
Yep. And then we'll have to have yet another discussion about eating ecosystems.
That is going to be the mother of all eating ecosystems if that comes out. So that was actually something that we did talk about on Speaking in Tech, Greg and Ed's thing. So they were kind of trying to speculate on what that meant. So we'll see. Well, cool, man. Listen, I think we've been yapping our gums for a long time. Any other news and notes that are worth bringing up for this week before we move on? Oh, hey, I got one question. I got something before I throw this out to you. So, 2 of the most popular shows we've ever done have been the thing that we thought was kind of a complete joke, which was the fantasy football cloud draft.
Yep.
So we've got both the Final Four, or the March Madness thing coming up, which is the mother of all brackets and stuff for people. And we've got the speculation about the new pope. Do you think for either one of those things we should do a Cloudcast something or another? We
should probably come up with something.
Or do we spare our listeners the grief of what we might come up with?
Well, we'll ask them. So the email address is show@thecloudcast.net. If you want us to, let us know. If you want us to spare you, let us know.
Yeah, or just send us a tweet that is hashtag Cloud Pope or Pope Cloud or Cloud Madness or something like that, and we'll do one or the other. I'm not sure I want to keep up with thousands of brackets from people. But maybe we can do it on CBS Sports or something.
There you go.
But well, cool, man. Well, listen. Why don't we wrap it up and take it home and not bore people to death anymore?
Yeah, sounds good. So if you like the show, please tell a friend or leave us a review on iTunes. You can follow us on Twitter at @thecloudcastnet or on the web at thecloudcast.net, where you can find links to everything Cloudcast. Thanks for listening, everyone.